In October 2021, 22-year-old Emily and her husband Joseph went on a short trip to Vermont. It was intended to be a quick getaway, a chance for them to spend time together and try to work through issues in their relationship. However, not long after they arrived, Joseph came back alone. He told others that Emily had simply walked away, saying she no longer wanted to be with him. His explanation didn't fully make sense. And when Emily suddenly stopped all communication, her family's worry quickly escalated into something much more serious. That was the moment when a deeply troubling story began to unfold. Emily Jean Schwarz was born on July 25, 1999 in Plymouth, New Hampshire. She was raised in a close-knit, loving family that helped shape her strong sense of purpose and emotional insight. Those who knew her described her as someone who always knew what to say to bring comfort. She was kind, thoughtful, and fiercely loyal to the people she loved. Music was Emily's emotional refuge and her primary form of expression. Her voice was gentle yet powerful, often stopping people in their tracks when she sang. Music was never just a pastime for her. It was an extension of who she was. Every song and every note reflected her inner world, her warmth, and her openness. Even with a busy schedule, Emily consistently made time to help others, especially animals. She regularly visited local animal shelters where she spent hours caring for the animals and offering them the affection and attention they desperately needed. Emily's dreams were modest and heartfelt. She envisioned a warm, welcoming home filled with music and love and a family built on trust and kindness. She wasn't drawn to wealth or extravagance. All she wanted was to share her life with someone who valued the same sense of peace and simplicity. Emily met Joseph during a period when her life finally felt calm and stable. They were introduced by mutual friends, and their connection felt natural from the start. Conversations between them flowed easily and were marked by openness and honesty. Joseph appeared grounded and considerate. He spoke less. Then he listened. And when he did talk, it was with a gentle tone and a reserved smile that made Emily feel comfortable and safe being her true self. Joseph was born in 1980 and was also raised in New Hampshire. He rarely spoke about his childhood, but he often mentioned that he had always known how to get along with others. He stayed away from conflict and almost never raised his voice, choosing to listen instead of trying to control conversations. Throughout the years, he worked a variety of jobs and didn't remain in any one position for very long, though he eventually settled into a career that offered him a measure of stability and independence. He had been married once before, but he shared very little about that period of his life. Emily chose not to push for details as she preferred focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the past. From her perspective, Joseph appeared ready to build a life together. He seemed to respect her interests, encouraged her passions, and showed genuine curiosity about her work. He talked openly about wanting a home and a family, aligning with the future Emily had always imagined. During the early weeks of Their relationship, Joseph made a clear effort to show his affection. He planned small getaways, surprised Emily with meaningful gestures, and repeatedly told her how much he admired her dreams and ambitions. Emily believed him completely. To her, his care felt genuine and sincere. Her friends noticed the change almost immediately. She smiled more when she spoke about Joseph, and described him with warmth and hope, often saying that being with him made her feel peaceful and secure. Emily's parents, however, felt uneasy from the start. There was something about Joseph that didn't sit right with them, as though he was concealing part of himself. Even so, they had no concrete reason to object, and Emily chose not to let their concerns influence her feelings. The relationship progressed quickly, but without obvious turmoil. They frequently talked about the future, sharing visions of a comfortable home built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. In those early months, Emily truly believed her dreams were beginning to come true. She felt she had found someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. Yet beneath that sense of trust, subtle warning signs were already present. Signs Emily wasn't ready to acknowledge. Her desire for peace and stability made it difficult for her to consider that Joseph's calm and gentle exterior might be concealing something far more concerning. From their very first interactions with Joseph, Emily's parents felt that something wasn't quite right. His quiet, reserved manner didn't come across to them as simple shyness, but rather as discomfort. Although he spoke softly and carefully, they sensed an underlying tension behind his words that he struggled to conceal. To them, it seemed clear that there was more to Joseph than he was willing to reveal. Things Emily had not yet begun to notice. A few months into the relationship, Emily started confiding in close friends and family about moments when Joseph showed flashes of impatience. At times, he would cut her off abruptly if he thought she was wrong. Her parents listened closely and noticed a strain in her voice that suggested deeper concern. Still, Emily often rushed to change the subject, as if she feared that discussing it further might open the door to uncomfortable questions she wasn't ready to face. As time went on, those moments became more clearly defined. Emily explained that during arguments, Joseph would raise his voice and sometimes criticize her over minor, insignificant issues. She downplayed these incidents, attributing them to stress or nerves and insisting they were only brief lapses. Her parents, however, were not reassured. They understood that repeated displays of aggression, even subtle ones, can be warning signs of something far more serious. One day, Emily confessed that during an emotional outburst, Joseph had grabbed her arm and squeezed it tightly. She was quick to explain it away, insisting it had only happened once and that he had immediately apologized. Still, her voice shook with uncertainty, as if she were trying to justify something that should never have occurred. Her parents didn't push her for more details, but deep down, they became increasingly certain that beneath her smile lay exhaustion and fear. Whenever her parents gently tried to learn more about what was happening, Emily reassured them that everything was fine and that she could manage on her own. They understood that pushing too hard might only drive her away. Emily was an adult, and interfering in her personal life risked damaging the already delicate bond they shared. In the end, all they could do was wait and hope that one day she would feel ready to open up and share the full truth. Her eyes, however, revealed a different story. Though she tried to appear composed, her parents could see through the facade. Behind closed doors, their home was not a sanctuary of love, but a place marked by fear and control. Joseph had gradually taken over Emily's life, beginning with emotional manipulation, and eventually extending to more direct physical dominance. He isolated her, limited her freedoms, and reacted with volatile outbursts. He manipulated her into believing that she was to blame for everything that went wrong. As is often the case in toxic relationships, Emily tried to rationalize his behavior. She clung to the hope that he would change, convincing herself that the situation was temporary. Perhaps she was afraid to leave. Or perhaps she carried feelings of guilt. Or maybe, just maybe, she had been preparing to break free but never got the chance. From the outside, their life appeared normal. They shared photos, went on trips, and smiled in public. Yet, beneath that facade, their relationship was quiet, dominated by fear and mistrust. Joseph didn't seek a partner. He sought control. And when he sensed that his hold over Emily was weakening, that she might soon break free, he made a final irrevocable decision. When Joseph proposed a trip to Vermont, Emily viewed it as an opportunity to step back and gain perspective on their relationship. The getaway was meant to be brief, a chance for just the two of them to reconnect. Despite her parents' concerns, Emily held on to hope. They knew about recent arguments, but Emily assured them she had everything under control and was capable of handling the situation herself. On October 15, 2021, they left New Hampshire, traveling in a vehicle towing a trailer. Joseph had mapped out the route in advance, selecting Bolton, a place he knew well and believed would be perfect for their brief getaway. Emily focused on the practical aspects of the trip, using the planning as a way to distract herself from the lingering worries at the back of her mind. She hoped that a few quiet days away from everyday pressures might help them reconnect. From the very beginning, however, Emily noticed subtle shifts in Joseph's behavior. He was unusually withdrawn and spoke very little, and the underlying tension made her uneasy. She tried to dismiss it, attributing it to fatigue from the drive. Still, she clung to the hope that the trip could mark a turning point, but the unease persisted, forming an invisible barrier that mere words couldn't dissolve. Part of their plan involved meeting Joseph's sister, Nicole, and her boyfriend. They were meant to share a warm dinner at a rental apartment Joseph had booked online. Emily approached the evening with cautious optimism, knowing how much Nicole meant to Joseph and wanting to Make a good impression. When they arrived, she greeted everyone with a smile, aiming to be friendly and approachable. She was polite and engaged in conversation easily, and on the surface, the evening seemed to go well. Everything appeared normal, yet something still felt off. It was as if every word Joseph spoke carried a subtle tension or quiet edge of irritation. Then, after a brief exchange, Joseph abruptly told Nicole they wouldn't be staying for dinner. The decision came without warning, leaving Emily with a sudden, unsettling sense of detachment. She couldn't fully process what had just occurred, but she realized their plans had changed suddenly and without explanation. Nicole and her boyfriend were left confused, while Emily felt a growing unease settle in the evening. That was meant to bring everyone together never truly happened. Instead, Joseph suggested they spend the night in the camper, claiming he wanted some quiet time alone with her. Emily went along, not wanting to provoke a disagreement. Her desire to maintain peace and preserve trust outweighed the mounting questions in her mind. That night passed in an unsettling silence. Emily had no way of knowing what the morning would bring, but she clung to the hope that daylight might bring clarity. She had no idea that this trip would turn into something far from peaceful, a final step into a situation from which there would be no escape. Those few days were meant to be a turning point in their relationship, but they ended in a tragic way. After that night, Emily was never heard from again. Her last phone call with her parents was short and vague. She assured them that everything was fine and that she and Joseph would be returning home soon. While her voice sounded calm, her parents sensed an underlying tension she couldn't fully conceal. Those words became the final confirmation that something was seriously wrong. 3 days passed without any word from Emily. Her family reached out to Joseph, who repeatedly told the same story, that Emily had walked away after an argument, and that he didn't know her whereabouts. Days later, Joseph returned home alone, continuing to insist to Emily's family that she had left voluntarily following a disagreement. According to Joseph, Emily had called for a ride and left, saying she no longer wanted to be with him. Emily's parents refused to accept that explanation and immediately contacted law enforcement. Joseph repeated the same story to both her family and the authorities, delivering it with practice, calm and without hesitation. But her parents weren't convinced. They knew their daughter well. She would never vanish without a word. Meanwhile, Joseph behaved as if nothing serious had occurred. His composed demeanor seemed forced, and each time he repeated his account, Emily's parents grew increasingly suspicious. They realized that if Emily hadn't contacted anyone for several days, something terrible must have happened. At that point, Joseph was the only person who might know the truth. But all they received from him were empty words, entirely devoid of remorse. Amid the mounting anxiety over Emily's disappearance, a call came in that would change everything. It was placed to emergency services by a man named Spencer Lemon. His voice was tense and shaky as he explained that he had Recently met with Joseph. Spencer wasn't particularly close to Joseph. They weren't true friends, but they kept in touch and occasionally helped each other with small tasks. On that day, Joseph had reached out to Spencer, asking him to come to St. Albans's, where the camper was located. Joseph claimed he urgently needed a ride back to the camper because he had left some belongings behind. Spencer had no idea what was really happening, but agreed to help. He picked Joseph up and together they drove to the location where the camper had been parked along the driveway. Joseph was unusually quiet, speaking very little and asking no questions. Spencer felt uneasy, but chose not to press him, at least until he could understand the situation better. As they approached the camper, Spencer noticed Joseph growing increasingly fidgety and tense. It was then that Spencer sensed something was seriously wrong and asked Joseph directly what had happened. Joseph's reply was shocking. In a calm, detached voice, he told Spencer that Emily was no longer alive. Struggling to comprehend, Spencer asked him directly if he had done something to her. Without hesitation, Joseph answered yes. The confession was chilling, delivered with the same casualness as if he were discussing something ordinary. In that moment, Spencer realized he was sitting next to someone who had just admitted to committing a grave and violent crime. Spencer's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that any sudden reaction could provoke an unpredictable response from Joseph. He didn't ask any further questions and instead pretended to go along with the situation. As soon as he saw an opening, he slipped away, got into his vehicle, and drove off. Shortly afterward, he called emergency services to report everything he had just witnessed. When speaking to the dispatcher, Spencer's voice was rushed and shaky as he recounted every detail he could remember. He explained that Joseph had admitted to causing Emily's death and that her body was in the camper. This report became the first concrete evidence that contradicted Joseph's story. For investigators, Spencer's call marked a critical turning point in the case. Law enforcement responded immediately, now armed with valid grounds to search the camper and bring Joseph in for questioning. What they found inside the camper shocked everyone involved. Joseph agreed to go to the station voluntarily for an interview, where he began recounting his version of events, one that seemed carefully constructed to minimize his responsibility. He described his relationship with Emily as far from perfect. He spoke of frequent arguments and claimed that the disagreement that night had started over something minor, insisting that Emily had provoked the tension and wanted to leave and that he couldn't stop her. Initially, he framed the situation as a tragic misunderstanding. But as officers pressed further, particularly referencing Spencer's call, cracks began to appear in his story. His words faltered and the confidence he initially displayed started to crumble. Joseph was compelled to admit that he had told his friend what had happened, marking the first major crack in his carefully constructed story. Investigators observed that despite his calm demeanor, his answers sounded rehearsed as if he were repeating lines he had practiced repeatedly. He insisted the events had been accidental and that he had never intended to harm Emily. Detectives, however, were not convinced. It became clear that he was withholding key details. Eventually, Joseph admitted that he and Emily had a heated argument. He claimed he had tried to walk away, but something inside him snapped. He described sitting in silence for several minutes, as though contemplating his next move. His words became detached, almost as if he were recounting someone else's actions. He then revealed that he had gone to a cabinet where he stored a firearm fitted with a suppressor. He recounted taking the firearm out and described how everything seemed to go quiet. At that moment, Emily was lying in bed, he said, unaware of what was about to happen. Joseph explained that he approached her, pressed a pillow over her head, and fired twice. He claimed he wanted it to be quick so that no one would hear. His tone was chillingly calm, and officers felt certain this was not an impulsive act. He had meticulously planned each step. Afterwards, Joseph said he sat motionless for several minutes, staring blankly. Then, he decided to conceal what he had done. He described carefully moving Emily's body into the small shower stall inside the camper. According to him, he turned on cold water to wash away the blood and clean up the scene. He recounted everything with a complete lack of emotion, as if describing something ordinary or routine. Joseph said that afterward he meticulously cleaned the camper, attempting to remove every trace of what had occurred. He wiped the floors, scrubbed stains, and checked every corner, claiming he did it all calmly and methodically. He believed that if he cleaned thoroughly enough, he could conceal the truth, at least temporarily. His words did not carry any sense of remorse. Instead, they were delivered as a matter-of-fact explanation of the steps he thought needed to be taken, directed at law enforcement. It became clear that investigators were dealing with someone who had acted intentionally, showing no signs of guilt. His account became a critical piece of evidence, leaving no doubt that Emily had been the victim of cold, calculated cruelty. Joseph didn't try to flee or distance himself from the consequences of his actions. In fact, the days that followed were even more unsettling for investigators. Instead of avoiding the scene, he stayed nearby. During the day, he remained close to the camper where Emily's body lay hidden behind the closed shower stall door, behaving as if nothing had happened. He interacted with people, went out for breakfast, and met with acquaintances. He joked, discussed everyday matters, and showed no visible signs of distress. Those who saw him had no reason to suspect the dark reality he carried. He displayed neither panic nor confusion. Instead, he appeared composed and confident, further reinforcing the illusion that everything was normal. In that same camper, just feet away from where Emily's body lay, Joseph ate his meals, drank tea, and even slept. Investigators confirmed that he spent every night there from the time of the incident until his arrest. He made no attempt to dispose of the body or find another place to stay. It became part of his daily routine. These actions demonstrated just how committed Joseph was to maintaining an outward appearance of normalcy. He needed everything around him to seem ordinary so that no one would suspect what had happened. Aware that any unusual behavior could draw attention, he moved with calculated care. In later discussions with investigators, Joseph admitted that he had been deliberately acting as if nothing had occurred. He said he didn't want anyone to notice any change in his behavior. He even claimed to have a plan. If anyone asked about Emily's whereabouts, he said he would invent a plausible story to maintain his secret. This was all part of a strategy to conceal the truth. During those days, Emily's loved ones repeatedly called Joseph, asking if he had seen her. Each time, he answered in the same calm, measured tone, repeating his narrative that she had walked away after an argument. His steady voice unnerved those desperate for answers. No one could have imagined that during those calls, he was returning to the camper, hiding such a grim reality. His composure was chilling in its absoluteness. Officers who later reconstructed the timeline said Joseph's cold demeanor during those days made the situation even more disturbing. He didn't simply commit a horrific act. He continued to live afterward as if nothing had changed. At first glance, Emily's death might have seemed like the tragic result of a single moment of anger or a heated argument. But as investigators delved deeper, the reality became undeniable. This was not an accident. It was a calculated crime, rooted in psychological control and a pattern of behavior that had been escalating long before the tragedy occurred. For Joseph, life revolved around controlling others as a means of giving himself a sense of purpose. His relationship with Emily was never about love. It was about domination. What began with affection gradually transformed into fear. He dictated where she could live, who she could interact with, and how she should behave. His aggressive actions were not isolated incidents or fleeting outbursts. They were part of a deliberate pattern of control. It was a deliberate, methodical pattern. Any hint of independence from Emily was perceived as a threat. Over time, the tension between them grew. Emily began to distance herself, sharing troubling experiences with her parents. And Joseph noticed. For a man whose identity was built around control, the prospect of losing it was intolerable. This wasn't about heartbreak. It was about defeat. He could not allow her to leave. Not out of love, but because he viewed her choice to walk away as a personal loss. His motive wasn't self-preservation. It was about eliminating the one thing he could not control. When he ended Emily's life, it was not in a moment of uncontrolled rage. It was calculated and deliberate. He acted while she slept, quietly and methodically, ensuring that if she wouldn't be his, she wouldn't be anyone's. Afterward, he attempted to cover up his actions, not out of panic, but to maintain control over not just Emily's life, but her death and everything that followed. His motive wasn't revenge, fear, or self-defense. It was the desire to preserve power at any cost. The court proceedings began, with the prosecution presenting the evidence, highlighting every word Joseph had spoken and every inconsistency in his account as crucial parts of the case. Prosecutors argued decisively that the crime was premeditated and that Joseph's actions afterward were part of a deliberate plan to conceal his deeds. They detailed not only the incident itself, but also the horrifying aftermath, explaining how Joseph had dismembered Emily's body. The court heard that he had admitted to using a saw to cut up her remains and placed them into plastic bags in an effort to hide the evidence of his crime. Forensic experts also testified, confirming that Emily had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, followed by knife injuries inflicted post-mortem. These findings demonstrated that Joseph had acted with chilling precision, not in a sudden moment of emotional instability. The forensic evidence became a central element of the prosecution's case. Joseph, however, attempted to present a different narrative. He spoke of ongoing tension in the relationship, claimed that Emily frequently provoked arguments, and insisted that the crime had not been premeditated. He described the dismemberment as a desperate attempt to manage the aftermath, but his explanations were unconvincing. The evidence painted a far darker, more deliberate picture. Emily's friends and parents also testified, offering insight into who she truly was and the life she had been robbed of. Kind-hearted and gentle, always willing to help others. These were the qualities her loved ones remembered. For them, the trial wasn't just about achieving justice. It was about preserving her memory and honoring her life. Their testimony stood in stark contrast to Joseph's attempts to portray the crime as a tragic accident. A few days after closing arguments, the court delivered its verdict. Joseph was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison. That sentence became more than just a measure of time. It was a symbol of accountability for Emily's parents. While it couldn't bring their daughter back, it ensured that the person responsible would not walk free. Emily's life was cut far too short, but her memory endures. Her family continues to carry her voice and spirit in their hearts. They knew the truth. They understood what had truly happened, and that knowledge gave them the strength to keep moving forward. By sharing Emily's story, they hope to guide others toward making different choices, choices that reject cruelty and embrace honesty. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant. Music.